So this is not quite how I planned this video to go. Originally, this was supposed to be a stock plugin mixing challenge. One of our colleagues, Cesar Nava from Bull Terrier Studio, challenged us to do a free plugin mixing challenge. I told him instead of doing that, I was going to do a stock plugin mixing challenge. We did the challenge. If you want to check out how we actually did it, you can head over to our twitch.tv stream on the challenge and you can watch the whole thing. But now that we're actually shooting the actual video, we don't have our console. A couple of weeks ago, our console went down, and that means our setup is messed up at the moment. And it just makes it a whole lot harder to actually show what we're doing. So instead of actually going through the entire mix again, let's talk about just how far can you actually go using just the stock plugins. Well, let's get to it. Okay, first things first. Let's head on over to the Avid website, have a look at what Pro Tools actually offers. If you were to subscribe to Pro Tools today, you would get the Avid Complete plugin bundle, and that offers 115 different plugins you can use to power your productions. It's a pretty expansive plugin suite. You have a few virtual instruments. You have 11, which is a really powerful amp emulation suite. You also have some EQs, some dynamics plugins, some reverbs and delays, and also a bunch of different effects plugins. Now, a lot of these plugins are actually really good. There are some that I actually use on my day-to-day workflow, even when I'm not using the stock plugins. And I would say Avid actually does a pretty good job in actually bundling these plugins together with Pro Tools. You can get a lot done just using the stock plugins that come with the software. Now, it's not perfect. In fact, it's actually pretty far from perfect. From doing the actual challenge, I found out that there are some areas where things are actually worse than I thought, and some areas where I was actually pleasantly surprised. Let's actually talk about what happens when you try to do this. So for the challenge, we downloaded a multitrack from the Cambridge Music Technology website. And in this website, you can actually find a bunch of different multitracks. It's a good way to get your mixing chops up. You download some multitracks, mix a song, and that way maybe you get more familiar with actually mixing, and you don't have to be recording all the time. I know it can be a challenge to get some good multitracks to practice on. The song we picked is a song called Muddy Water by Dorothea Wessel. I'm gonna put the link in the description, so go ahead, download the multitrack, try the challenge on your own, and see if you agree with my opinion on stock plugins. I'm gonna start with what I've found worked well using the stock plugins. Number one, amp emulation is something that works really well, and you don't really need to buy anything to get some good sounds. Let me pull up 11. I use this to simulate a mic'd amp setup, which is what I usually do whenever I record. I'll record the DI track and a couple of mics on the cabinet, but we don't have that in this session. So instead, I have the DI track and I used 11 to get a simulated amp. Another thing I used a lot was the PSA1. Now, I use this not only for the bass, I also use this to try and get some tone shaping and make some of the tracks that sounded a little boring, they just didn't have any energy or excitement because they're samples, and just make them pop out a little bit more. I use this on the kick, I use that on the snare. I also used it on the overheads in the room. This is a trick I learned from Mix with the Masters. If you subscribe to Mix with the Masters and watch the Chad Blake sessions, you're gonna see he uses this one a lot to try and get some harmonic distortion out of stuff. And it can really make some tracks that sound boring sound a lot better. You can use it sort of like an EQ, and you can also use it to make things just sound a little bit more interesting. It does take a little bit of tweaking though. This is not something you can just slap on and it will sound great. No, it doesn't work like that. You have to try and squeeze out and bend the sound to your will to where it actually sounds where you want it. Let's go to the other surprise, which is the dynamics plugins. The standard plugin suite actually does have some pretty competent dynamics options. We have the Bomb Factory LA2A. Many years ago, you have to pay for this, but now it's bundled together with the Avid Complete plugin pack. And the LA2A is my go-to compressor for vocals. I'll use this on a parallel compression. In this track, that's what I used. The other option that I like, it's not my favorite, is the Pro Compressor. It's a pretty powerful compressor plugin. It has a lot of controls and you can get it to sound like a whole lot of different compressors. And this track, I used it in series with Smack, which is also a really good dynamics plugin. It's kind of old by now, but it just sounds good. It's sort of like the Waves H compressor, and it just sounds good. You have a normal setting, a warm option, and an opto option to simulate an optical compressor. You also have 3 options for distortion, for odd, even, and odd plus even. You can get it to sound like tubes, or you can get it to sound solid state, or both at the same time. So it's a really competent dynamics plugin. The final surprise here was Impact. This is something I hadn't tried out before this challenge, and Impact is a G-Bus style compressor. It just sounds good. It sounds like a G-Bus, and it doesn't exactly respond like the actual G-Bus, but it's close. You can use this, and you don't need to buy a different G-Bus compressor. You don't need to buy the SSL native or Plugin Alliance or whatever. This one works. Use this. Another area I think the stock plugins work really well is in effects plugins. I mean, my go-to reverb is actually a stock Pro Tools reverb, and that is Space. This is a convolution reverb. It takes impulse responses of real spaces or even actual hardware, and it just sounds amazing. You have this huge palette of different spaces, many different halls. You have different churches, rooms, chambers, plates, springs, all sorts of different reverbs, and even some digital reverbs that actually sound really good. You even have like an RMX 16, which you would need to buy a plugin just to simulate this. So before you buy any reverb plugin, give this one a shot, because this is just an amazing reverb. Another effects plugin that comes with Pro Tools that I use a lot is the flanger that comes with 11. This is just a pretty simple flanger. I'll use this on vocals a lot. I'll put this in parallel and I'll just sneak it in a little bit there, and I'll just make vocals sound a little bit wider. And I don't even tweak the settings. I just slap that on there, set the mix to 100%, and that'll be it. I also use Mod Delay 3 a lot because it's just a simple, no frills whatsoever delay. I'll use this to simulate early reflections. I'll use this as a slapback delay. And also, because it's simple and it doesn't color your sound, you can use that delay and just shape it to however you need it just by adding other plugins after the delay. So now that we've talked about the good stuff, maybe it's time to talk about the stuff that didn't go so well. I would say the stock EQs that come with Pro Tools aren't great. You don't have that many options. I would say the best one is EQ3 7-band. It can help with some utilitarian tasks like finding the annoying frequency on drums that you want to take out. You can use this to surgically remove it and it will sound good. I wouldn't use this as a character EQ though, because it just sounds boring. There's just no magic to it. If you really need to, you can use this, but it's not the best. There's also very little options for channel strips. You only have this Avid channel strip, and frankly, the interface is just clunky and it's just not very good. It would be really great if you could get an SSL style channel strip in Pro Tools. You do get some Pultec style EQs, and if you need and you actually use Pultecs a lot, you don't need to buy a different Pultec. The standard Pultec that comes with Pro Tools is actually pretty decent. I don't use Pultecs too much, but if you do, you have some options with the standard plugins. Okay, the second area where I think Avid really dropped the ball is in metering. You really need some more comprehensive metering options. If you need loudness units metering, for example, when you're doing mastering, there's not much you can do because there's no standard metering plugin. However, there is a workaround. You can pull up ProLimiter and get LUFS metering, but it's not the best way. I mean, you have to pull up a limiter to get LUFS metering. They could have just offered the LUFS metering without the limiter. However, I would say the nail in the coffin for using just stock plugins would be vocal tuning. There's no option for vocal tuning using stock plugins. So if you need to tune any vocals, you need to buy something. You can't get away with just using the stock plugins. So just how far can you go using the stock plugins? Here's where I would say, if you know what you're doing, you can actually do pretty well. I mean, you could probably deliver a competent mix using just the stock plugins, but I wouldn't recommend it. It just takes a whole lot more effort because you're just missing some of the tools you need. Now, if you're recording your own stuff and you need to do vocal tuning, then you can't go get anywhere because you don't have the tools. If you're starting with audio production today, don't buy anything. Try and use the stock plugins. Download a session, try mixing it just using stock plugins. Once you try that out, you'll have a better idea of what you need to actually buy. Once you actually feel that, well, this is not working for me, then try out some of the trials for the big plugin manufacturers. Give those a shot. Try and do the stock plugin mixing challenge. So if you like this video, consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon to get notified whenever we post. We're also trying to do some live discussions and mixing sessions over on twitch.tv, so go ahead and give it a shot. So I'll see you in the next video.